The harsh winds of Argo's 7 bit into the colony walls with an insistent, moaning force that made even the most hardened settlers shiver. Dr. Lara Quinn pulled her coat closer, glancing over the readings on her tablet as she stood on the colony's western edge, her eyes fixed on the dense, shadowed forest beyond. For days, the data had shown fluctuations in the bioluminescent plant life, and now there was something else, a faint, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from deep within the forest, like a heartbeat that grew fainter with distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just an anomaly. Lara. A voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Samir, the colony's lead engineer, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and concern. His bulky form, wrapped in the colony's rough gear, seemed almost out of place against the backdrop of Argo's VI's strange beauty. "Samir, you need to see this," she said, handing him her tablet. "The pulse in these plants, it's getting stronger." Samir's brow furrowed as he examined the data, his dark eyes narrowing. "It's almost like some kind of signal." Lara nodded, excitement sparking despite her underlying unease. "It's faint, but it's definitely consistent. And it's coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. Something, or someone, is out there." Behind them, the colony bustled with activity. Over 200 people lived in this remote settlement, far from Earth, driven by a single mission: survival. They were humanity's last hope, the final chance to rebuild after Earth's resources had dwindled. But the uncharted wilderness of Argos had proved both dangerous and tantalizing, filled with plants that glowed in the dark and alien creatures that watched from a distance, eerily silent. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also lethal. As Lara and Samir headed back towards the main compound, a figure approached, a tall, sharp-eyed man with a military stride and a look of perpetual suspicion etched onto his face. Kai, the head of security, was one of the few people who had been skeptical of their exploration efforts from the start. "You two look like you're up to something," Kai said, crossing his arms. "Let me guess, another hike into the unknown?" Samir shot him a glare. "It's not just a hike, Kai. There's something out there." Lara's readings show an energy signal coming from within the forest. Kai scoffed, though his eyes betrayed a hint of interest. "A signal? We're barely surviving out here, and you two want to chase ghosts? This isn't Earth. The rules are different here." Lara straightened, meeting his gaze with quiet determination. "That's exactly why we have to investigate, Kai. This might be our best chance to understand this planet, maybe even find a new source of energy. If there's something out there, we need to know." A silence fell between them. Finally, Kai sighed and shrugged. "Fine. But I'm coming with you." They agreed to set out at dawn, bringing along Lena, the colony's tech specialist, who was known for her knack with anything electronic. The team assembled at the edge of the forest, each of them carrying gear suited to the unknown dangers of Argos. Lara took one last look at the settlement behind them, her stomach twisting with anticipation and anxiety. This wasn't just a journey into the forest, it was a venture into the heart of a mystery that could redefine their understanding of their new world. As they ventured deeper, the trees thickened, towering above with twisting branches that seemed to reach for the sky, glowing faintly in the twilight. The air grew dense, and the pulse, now almost like a hum, grew stronger, resonating with every step they took. The group moved cautiously, speaking in whispers, each sound amplified by the forest's eerie silence. Hours passed, and Lara found herself increasingly uneasy. The air felt charged, electric, like a storm on the verge of breaking. Then, suddenly, Samir stopped, his eyes wide as he pointed ahead. "Do you see that?" In the distance, partially hidden by a cluster of twisted vines, was what looked like a ruin, a structure that didn't belong on Argos 7. Lara's heart pounded as she and the others approached, stepping over vines and fallen branches to get a closer look. The structure was old, crumbling, and covered in alien moss, yet undeniably human in its construction. "It looks like some kind of research outpost," Lena whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "But that's impossible. We're supposed to be the first ones here." Lara's mind raced. If humans had been here before, why were there no records? Why hadn't they found any evidence before now? She felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on her, a dark, foreboding sense that they were about to uncover something far bigger than themselves. They entered the ruin cautiously, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Old equipment lay strewn across the floor, some of it eerily similar to their own technology, yet covered in dust and signs of age that spoke of years, even decades of abandonment. Alara's gaze was drawn to a console in the corner, faintly glowing with a residual energy that defied explanation. As she approached, a series of symbols flashed across the screen. They weren't Earth languages, but somehow they felt familiar. Her fingers hovered over the controls, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over her. She hesitated, her heart pounding as if the pulse she'd been following was now echoing in her chest. "Lara," Kai said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "What do you think this means?" She shook her head, the weight of the unknown settling heavily on her shoulders. "I don't know. But whatever happened here, we weren't the first to experience it." Suddenly, a faint crackling sound filled the air, and the symbols on the screen began to change, shifting into an audio pattern that formed words in English, though distorted and ghostly. "If you're listening, leave before it finds you." The voice faded, leaving only the echo of its haunting warning in the room. Lara looked at her team, her face pale. Whatever had happened here had left its mark, a warning etched into the ruins of a forgotten past. They exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the message thickening the air. Samir was the first to break the silence, his voice low. "We need to record this. This isn't just an anomaly, it's a warning." Lena, visibly shaken, activated her recording device, panning it around the room. But Alara's focus was still on the console, her thoughts racing. Why had there been no record of this colony or the people who had been here before them? What had happened to them? As she reached out to touch the console, Kai grabbed her arm. "Don't. We don't know what triggered that message or what's still active here." She hesitated but then nodded, pulling back. Kai was right, whatever was left here held the weight of an ominous past that shouldn't be disturbed lightly. They moved through the crumbling hallways, following the residual power signals. Every few steps, a faint pulse would echo around them, almost like a heartbeat but quieter, more insidious. The deeper they went, the more the air felt stifling, as though the ruin itself was warning them to turn back. Yet they pressed on, curiosity and duty overriding caution. Finally, they reached a room that seemed untouched by time, its metal walls gleaming under their flashlight beams. In the center stood a large, cylindrical pod encased in thick glass, faintly illuminated. Inside, a figure lay suspended in some kind of stasis, a human figure. Lara felt her breath catch in her throat. "This can't be possible," she whispered. They were supposed to be alone on this planet, the last remnants of the human race. Yet here was someone, or something, who had been here all along. Kai moved closer, peering into the glass with narrowed eyes. If they were in stasis, they could have been here for decades. Maybe even centuries. Lena tapped at the console beside the pod, her fingers trembling slightly. "The life signs are weak, but they're stable. Whoever this is, they're still alive." The thought hit them all at once, if there was one survivor, there could be more. And if this person had been left behind, what had happened to the others? Suddenly, the console screen flickered, and a message appeared, written in the same eerie, distorted script. Lena's eyes widened as she translated the symbols. "Warning, do not release." A shiver ran through Lara. Release from what? Are they a prisoner? Or were they protected from whatever happened here? Kai looked skeptical, his usual practicality resurfacing. Or maybe they were the cause of it. "We're not releasing anything until we know what we're dealing with." But as they debated, the pulse grew stronger, vibrating the very walls around them. The sound was rhythmic, almost like footsteps, growing closer with each beat. Samir's hand hovered over his weapon, his eyes darting around the room. "We're not alone. There's something in here with us." The walls seemed to close in as the pulse quickened, becoming erratic, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. Alara's heart raced. "We need to get out of here, now." But before they could move, the pod began to glow brighter, the figure inside stirring as if awakening. The console next to it flared to life, displaying a single, ominous word in clear English. "Run." In a split-second decision, Alara grabbed Lena's arm, and they sprinted toward the entrance, Samir and Kai close behind. They hurtled through the corridors, the pulse thundering in their ears, the walls themselves seeming to vibrate in tune with the mysterious, approaching force. They didn't dare look back. As they broke through the outer doors, stumbling into the open air, Alara felt the oppressive weight lift, but not entirely. The forest around them had gone eerily silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The sense of dread remained, lingering in the silence. They collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, each of them shaken by what they'd seen. Lena, clutching her recording device, looked back at the ruin with wide eyes. "What was that thing?" Samir shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever it was, it didn't want us there." "And that figure inside the pod, what if they were put there to contain something?" Kai stood, his expression grim. "We've poked at something we shouldn't have. I say we leave that place and pretend it doesn't exist." Lara wasn't so sure. The signal had been there for a reason. Someone, or something, had wanted them to find it, to see the warning. And the mystery of who had been there before, of why they'd left this world's hidden secrets behind, gnawed at her mind. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "we need to understand it. Our survival here might depend on it." The team returned to their settlement on Argo 7, their minds consumed by the unsettling events within the ruins. They could barely process what they had just encountered, the mysterious figure in stasis, the warnings etched across ancient screens, and the pulsating heartbeat-like rhythm that seemed to resonate from the depths of the structure. All of it was laced with questions they were unprepared to answer. But the incident wasn't something they could just leave behind. Even as the colony lights flickered on for the evening cycle, an oppressive silence filled the air, a collective tension as if the entire settlement was haunted by the memory of what lay out there. Lara couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying the events of the day, unable to shake the feeling that something ancient and malevolent had been disturbed. She finally gave up and sat up in bed, reaching for her datapad to review the recordings Lena had managed to capture. But as she replayed the footage, a chilling discovery emerged. There, faint but unmistakable, were faint whispers, like the remnants of voices that had been layered onto the recording. They weren't loud enough to understand fully, but they hinted at something like a warning. She immediately calmed Lena, her voice urgent. "I need you to check the recordings. There's something else. I don't think we were alone back there in the way we thought." Lena arrived at Alara's quarters a few minutes later, disheveled and clutching her own datapad. She had been unable to sleep as well, and the unease in Alara's voice had only increased her anxiety. The two sat in silence, analyzing the audio. With each playback, they both heard it, a faint, barely perceptible whisper, a language they couldn't identify. Aara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It's like an echo. Something left behind. But if they're just echoes, why do they sound so conscious? Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Just then, Kai appeared at the door, his face drawn and tense. "I think we have a bigger problem," he said, motioning for them to follow. They exchanged a look but hurried after him, winding through the settlement corridors until they reached the central control room. Inside, Samir was staring at a series of monitors, his face pale and grim. "We've been receiving intermittent power fluctuations," he said, his voice tight. "It's coming from the ruin." Alara's heart dropped. "That's impossible. The power there was supposed to be dormant." "Not anymore," Samir said, turning to them, his eyes filled with worry. "It's like whatever we did there woke something up. The signals are erratic, but they're growing stronger. I think it's a beacon of some kind, and it's transmitting." The words hung heavily in the room, each of them realizing the implications. The colony had been established on Argos 7 precisely because of its remoteness, its isolation from any known threats. A beacon would change that, drawing attention to their location. They knew they had no choice. They would have to return to the ruin and find a way to deactivate the signal before it drew any unwanted attention. But the idea of stepping back into that place filled each of them with dread. As they prepared to return to the ruin, Kai gathered the group, his face serious. "We're going in, shutting down the beacon, and getting out. No detours, no distractions." They entered the ruin with heightened caution, the familiar walls and hallways now carrying an added layer of menace. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the hum of the beacon as they drew closer. The pulse they'd felt before was stronger, almost as if the ruin was alive, breathing with anticipation. When they reached the central chamber, the stasis pod was still there, illuminated by the eerie glow. But this time, the figure inside was moving. It was subtle, a shift in posture, the slightest twitch of a finger, but enough to make it clear that the figure was awake. Samir swore under his breath. "How is this possible? That person's been here for centuries." The console blinked, drawing their attention with a new message, clearer than the ones before. "I am awake. I am watching." The words sent a chill through them. Whoever or whatever was in that pod was aware of their presence, and they could feel an intelligence steadying them from behind the glass. Lara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Let's shut down this beacon and get out of here." Lena and Samir began working on the console, fingers flying over the controls as they navigated the ancient interface. The beacon's power source was deeply embedded in the system, and it would take time to sever it completely. But as they worked, the figure in the pod began to stir more violently, its face pressing against the glass, its eyes now open and focused on them. A shudder ran through Lena, and she whispered, "It's like it knows we're trying to shut it down. It doesn't want us to." Kai glanced at the figure, his jaw set. "I don't care what it wants. We're shutting this down and leaving." But just as they made the final adjustment, the power surged, flooding the room with a blinding light. The beacon's hum rose to a deafening pitch, and the stasis pod's glass shattered, sending shards flying across the room. They shielded themselves, but when the light faded, the figure was gone. A deep, echoing voice filled the chamber. "You should not have come here." Panic set in as they scanned the room, but there was no sign of the figure. It was as if it had dissolved into thin air, leaving only the ominous voice behind. Lara felt a presence move behind her, brushing past like a shadow. She spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice barely steady. But as they turned to leave, the corridors shifted, closing off exits and twisting the space around them. It was as if the ruin itself had become a labyrinth, trapping them in its clutches. The voice echoed again, this time softer, more insidious. "You came here for answers. You will not leave until you understand." Kai clenched his fists, determination hardening his features. "No way are we staying in here. We're getting out, now." They moved quickly, sticking close to each other as they navigated the disorienting corridors. But with every turn, the ruin seemed to shift, blocking their path and leading them deeper into its heart. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to slither along the walls, coalescing into vaguely human forms that whispered as they passed. Fragments of words floated through the air: desperation, regret, sorrow. They felt like echoes from a distant past, trapped in a perpetual cycle of despair. Finally, they stumbled into a massive chamber, unlike anything they'd seen before. Towering columns lined the walls, and at the center stood a massive, pulsating orb of light, the true source of the beacon. Samir stared at it, his face pale. This is the heart of the ruin. Whatever intelligence is here, it's anchored to this." Lara felt an overwhelming urge to approach it, the orb calling to her with a strange, hypnotic pull. She resisted, focusing instead on the mission. "We need to destroy it. It's the only way to stop the beacon and break free." Lena and Kai moved toward the control panel, analyzing it quickly. "There's no off switch," Lena said, frustration in her voice. But if we overload the system, it might shut down for good. They began working, bypassing the ancient circuits and diverting power back into the orb. But as they did, the shadowy figures began to close in around them, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. One of the shadows moved closer to Alara, its face taking on a human form, a woman's face, lined with sorrow and fear. "Why did you come here?" the figure whispered, her voice a mournful echo. "We tried to save them, we tried." Lara felt a surge of empathy, understanding that these were the remnants of the colony that had come before them. They had been caught in a similar trap, drawn to this place and unable to escape. She reached out, her hand passing through the shadow. "We're here to stop the beacon," she said softly. "We're here to help." The shadow seemed to waver, its form flickering as if caught between two worlds. But it gave a small nod, stepping back as if granting them permission to proceed. The control panel beeped, and Lena and Kai stepped back as the orb began to overload, its light intensifying to an unbearable brightness. The ruin trembled, walls cracking as the power surged, threatening to consume everything within. "Run!" Kai shouted, and they sprinted toward the exit, the ruin collapsing around them as they went. They raced through the corridors, which continued shifting around them, but now it felt as though the ruin itself was fighting against the beacon's power. Doorways opened up unexpectedly, shortcuts emerging to guide their escape. The walls trembled, fissures splintering through stone, and sparks from the overloaded circuits cast shadows across the path. The whispers grew fainter, as if the remnants of the colony that had been trapped there for centuries were fading, finally set free by the beacon's destruction. Elara's mind raced as she ran, each step taking her further from the heart of the ruin but closer to the truth she'd unearthed there. This place wasn't a relic or a ruin, it was a prison. Whatever intelligence or entity lay within had held on to any trace of life it encountered, trapping it in an endless cycle. She realized that it wasn't simply an ancient defense system or a relic of a lost colony, it was a consciousness, corrupted and desperate, bound to the technology it had once created. They reached the entrance at last, bursting through the ancient doors and collapsing onto the sand outside. As they scrambled away, the entire structure began to cave inward, the ground shaking violently as it was swallowed by its own weight. Dust and debris filled the air, obscuring the ruin as it sank, layer by layer, into the ground. When the tremor ceased, the ruin was gone, leaving nothing but a massive, gaping void where it had once stood. The team sat in silence, breathing heavily, each of them processing what they had just survived. The weight of it pressed down on them, and the night sky stretched out above, a vast, quiet expanse compared to the chaos they'd just left. Kai was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. "We stopped it. Whatever that thing was, it's gone now." But Lara didn't share his certainty. There was something lingering, a feeling that the entity wasn't truly destroyed but rather dormant, buried once again beneath the surface, waiting. As they made their way back to the settlement, the colony was silent. They moved with heavy steps, each of them changed by the ordeal, weighed down by the knowledge of what had transpired in that forgotten place. They returned to their quarters, each trying to process the nightmare they had escaped. But as Alara lay in her bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her thoughts drifted to the whispers, the fragments of warnings, and the figure in stasis. The beacon may have been destroyed, but whatever intelligence they'd encountered remained imprinted on her mind, a shadow that wouldn't fade. Just as she closed her eyes, the colony lights flickered, casting a dim glow across her room. She sat up, glancing at the light, her heart racing. There was a faint hum in the air, a sound she recognized, a rhythmic pulsing, faint but unmistakable, like a heartbeat emanating from somewhere beneath the ground. The ruin was gone, but whatever it held still lingered, buried deep within the planet's core. And as Alara stared into the darkness, she understood, their survival on Argos 7 had only just begun. Alara lay in bed, feeling the weight of everything they had uncovered. The rhythmic pulsing was faint, barely detectable, but its presence was undeniable, a grim reminder that their ordeal wasn't truly over. The discovery of the ruin had only scratched the surface of a much deeper mystery, one that pulsed beneath them, waiting. The following day, she met with her team to discuss their options. Kai, Alia, and Malik gathered around, their faces grim, their minds still reeling from their recent experience. None of them dared speak of the whispers, of the figure in stasis, or the terrible intelligence that had seemed to reach out to them. But the pulsing beneath their feet was something they couldn't ignore. What if there's more beneath the surface? Malik asked, his voice low. Alia nodded, her eyes haunted. What if it was never about the ruin at all? What if the ruin was just the beginning? Lara took a deep breath. Then we have to make a choice, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Do we risk investigating further, or do we find a way to leave Argo 7? Kai looked around the room, eyes dark with the weight of their decision. If that thing is still alive, whatever it is, it's tied to this planet. But if we stay here, it could mean our lives. Lara felt a strange resolve settle over her, a determination she hadn't expected. We need to find answers, but we have to be smart. We'll gather more information, piece together any remaining data from the ruins' collapse, and assess the threat before making any rash decisions. They spent days examining every resource they had, digging through remnants of old colony records, geological surveys, anything that might give them a clue. They avoided discussing the whispers, but in quiet moments, they exchanged looks that betrayed the memory they shared, a knowledge of the entity's presence, an awareness that none of them could shake. Finally, they found a hidden archive, locked away in the colony's mainframe, buried under layers of encrypted code. After hours of decoding, Malik cracked it open, revealing a series of logs from the first settlers of Argo 7. The logs painted a disturbing picture. Early settlers had detected faint energy readings from below the surface, noting anomalies similar to what the team had experienced. They had called it the heartbeat. The logs spoke of strange dreams, visions, whispers in the night, an insidious presence that seemed to probe at their minds. One log entry, in particular, stood out. We have tried to communicate with it, but it is beyond our understanding. It's like staring into the abyss, feeling it stare back, a thing ancient, vast, and incomprehensible. We were fools to settle here. This place is not for us. Lara felt a chill as she read the entry. It confirmed her worst fears. They were dealing with something beyond human comprehension, something that defied the laws of nature itself. The team realized they had only one option, to find a way to shut down the heartbeat at its source. They gathered every piece of equipment they had, preparing for a final journey to the core of Argo 7. This time, they weren't searching for ancient relics or hidden ruins. They were going to face the source of the power beneath their feet, to confront the thing that had been waiting, pulsing, beneath the surface. As they descended deeper into the planet, they could feel the heartbeat growing stronger, reverberating through the walls around them, its presence wrapping around them like a vice. The air was thick, oppressive, and with each step, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging them to turn back, warning them of what lay ahead. But Lara led them onward, her resolve unbroken, her mind focused on the task ahead. The descent felt endless. Every step took them closer to the core of Argo 7, where the heartbeat resonated like an ancient call. The temperature began to rise, and their flashlights flickered against the rough, rocky walls as if even light itself was afraid of this place. A sense of foreboding hung thick in the air, and Lara could see it in the team's faces, their skin slick with sweat, eyes wide, breath shallow. Finally, they reached a cavernous space that opened up before them like the maw of some great beast. The heartbeat was deafening now, each pulse vibrating through their bones. And there, at the center, they saw it. It was a structure unlike anything they had ever encountered, a massive, pulsating mass of energy that seemed to flow and undulate with each beat. Its form was amorphous, shifting and changing, an ever-moving web of light and shadow. Tendrils of energy snaked from it, twisting and curling through the air, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat. It was both beautiful and terrible, a living, breathing thing that defied all understanding. Kai gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. "What is that?" "It's alive," Alia whispered, her voice trembling. "It's sentient." Elara's mind raced, piecing together fragments of their research, the logs, the whispers. The heartbeat wasn't just some energy source. It was an entity, an intelligence that had been trapped here, slumbering beneath the planet's surface for millennia. And somehow, the arrival of the settlers, the construction of the colony, had awoken it. Malik stepped forward, eyes fixed on the writhing mass. If it's alive, then maybe we can reason with it. Make it understand that we mean no harm. Lara nodded slowly. We have to try. We can't leave without at least attempting to communicate. But be careful. Taking a deep breath, Lara approached the entity. The closer she got, the louder the whispers became, not just words but images, emotions, flashes of an ancient world, of cities built on impossible cliffs, skies filled with unknown stars. She saw fragments of life, memories of a civilization long gone, devoured by time. And through it all, she felt the entity's pain, its loneliness, a vast, aching emptiness that stretched across the ages. With trembling hands, she reached out, focusing her thoughts, trying to convey a message of peace, of understanding. She felt the entity's confusion, its curiosity, as if it were trying to comprehend her intentions. For a moment, it felt as though she were on the brink of making a connection, of bridging the gap between human and other. But then something shifted. The heartbeat intensified, pulsing faster, more erratic. The air grew thick with tension, and the whispers transformed, no longer gentle but harsh, angry, a warning. Lara. Kai's voice cut through the din, snapping her back to reality. It's reacting to us. The entity began to writhe, its tendrils lashing out, filling the cavern with a blinding, pulsing light. The team stumbled back, shielding their eyes, their minds overwhelmed by a surge of emotions, anger, fear, desperation. Lara, we need to get out of here. Malik shouted, grabbing her arm. But Lara resisted, her gaze locked on the entity, on the pain she had seen in its memories. She couldn't abandon it, couldn't leave it here to suffer alone. It wasn't just a threat, it was a being, a creature that had once known love and loss, joy and sorrow. We can't just leave it like this, she said, her voice choked with emotion. It's trapped here, alone. We have to help it. Alia shook her head, fear etched across her face. Lara, we can't save it. We barely understand it. Lara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Maybe we can't save it, but we can set it free. With a newfound determination, she reached for her equipment, modifying it to create a pulse strong enough to disrupt the heartbeat. She didn't know if it would work, didn't know if the entity would survive the release, but it was the only way to end its suffering, to give it a chance to escape this prison. The team worked together, following Lara's instructions, their movements swift, precise. The heartbeat grew louder, each pulse a violent, agonized beat that reverberated through the chamber, as if the entity knew what they were doing, as if it sensed the end approaching. Finally, the device was ready. Lara held her breath, her hand hovering over the trigger. She looked back at her team, saw the fear and determination in their eyes, and gave them a nod. Goodbye, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the heartbeat. With a final breath, she activated the device. The pulse shot out like a ripple, expanding outward and colliding with the walls of the cavern, flooding the space with a blinding light. Lara shielded her eyes as the heartbeat reached a crescendo, each pulse growing fainter until, suddenly, there was silence. When the light dimmed, she dared to open her eyes. The entity was no longer writhing, its tendrils fading into thin wisps that dissipated into the air. In its place remained a faint glow, a soft, steady hum, as though it was taking its final breath. She felt a deep sadness well up within her, as if saying goodbye to something irreplaceable, ancient, and wise. Lara's heart ached, but beneath that sorrow was a strange peace. She had felt the entity's consciousness in that last moment, a sense of gratitude mingled with release. The heartbeat was gone, but its memory would remain, a silent, enduring mark left on the planet and, perhaps, within each of them. The team lingered, a quiet, reverent silence settling over them as they absorbed what had just transpired. Then, with a heavy heart, Lara turned to lead them back through the winding tunnels. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had haunted them since their arrival lifting with each step. As they emerged onto the surface, the first faint rays of sunrise cast a warm glow across the barren landscape. The silence felt different now, no longer ominous, but peaceful, as though the planet was breathing easier. "Do you think it's really gone?" Alia asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Lara nodded, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "Not gone. Free." Kai looked out over the horizon, his gaze distant. "We came here thinking we'd find another place to survive, a second chance for humanity. But maybe we found something more valuable, a reminder of what it means to live, to understand, to let go." They gathered their things, the weight of the journey pressing on them, but so too did a sense of quiet resolve. They had witnessed the fragility of existence and the resilience of something beyond life as they knew it. And with that understanding came a responsibility, a promise to carry this lesson with them. Back on the shuttle, as the engines rumbled to life, Lara took one last look at the landscape of Argos 7. She knew that the experience had changed them all, that they would return to humanity not only with tales of exploration but with a newfound respect for life in all its forms. As the shuttle ascended, the planet grew smaller, the mystery of Argos 7 left behind. But they knew it would remain a part of them, a reminder of the endurance of life, the strength and understanding, and the courage it took to set something free.